Look back at my early childhood and I think about my early inklings with the trans experience. And one of my earliest memories, just in life in general, was I was probably about 3 or 4 years old. And I very distinctly remember asking my mother, when am I going to turn into a girl?
Hi, welcome. This is Pride Month, and the issue that we're going to be talking about today is transgender. I have some really great interviews for you, but before we get there, I want to read to you some things that perhaps you're not aware of. The Human Rights Campaign Foundation has estimated that there are more than 2 million members of the transgender community across the United States. A 2016 Pew study says that 3 out of every 10 adults in the United States personally knows someone who is trans. 2020 was the most deadly year for people who identify as trans, with at least 44 deaths. Trans people face a legal system that often does not protect them from discrimination based on their gender identity. Despite a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision that makes it clear that trans people are legally protected from discrimination in the workplace, there is still no comprehensive federal non-discrimination law that includes gender identity. Trans people experience violence at rates far greater than the average person. A 2019 study from the Williams Center at UCLA found that trans people live in poverty at elevated rates, and for trans people of color, these rates are even higher. 33 states have introduced more than 100 bills that aim to curb the rights of transgender people across the country, with advocacy groups calling 2021 a record-breaking year for such legislation. Those are the political realities, but beneath the political realities are human ones. And I don't think we can change anything on the outside until we have the kinds of requisite changes on the inside as well. With any kind of prejudice and bigotry, so much is rooted in the fact that people simply don't know. And when it comes to transgender, many people simply have never known a transgender person. And I've had the honor and the pleasure of having some good friends who are transgender. One woman that is going to be speaking to us today is a political candidate. She's a congressional candidate that's part of the candidate summit of endorsees that we have, that perhaps you have heard about at candidatesummit.com. And the other one, another woman here, is a good friend of mine, someone that I've known for many years, was the first transgender person I ever knew, and from whom I have learned so much. Our last interview today is with a niece of mine who has a child in the midst of transitioning. Her journey has impressed all members of my family, her vulnerability, her authenticity, her transparency. She's being such a good mom. And one of the things that both Maybe, who you'll be speaking to, and Lauren spoke about is the role that their mothers played, the acceptance and the embrace that they were shown by their parents, but particularly their mothers. So there might be somebody watching, somebody listening right now who has a child who is saying, Mommy, I'm supposed to be a girl, or Mommy, I'm supposed to be a boy. And as a parent, you don't really know what you're supposed to say, what you're supposed to do. Maybe you're confused yourself. My first interview is with Maybe a Girl. She is running for the U.S. Congress from California District 28. She's the first drag queen ever elected to political position in the United States. And when elected, she will be the first trans person to serve in the U.S. Congress. My second interview is with Lauren Foster, who has been everything from a Vogue model to the winner of Variety Magazine's 2019 Women of Empowerment Award. She's also head of LGBTQ services at University of Miami Hospital. My third interview, as I already mentioned, is with someone dear to my heart, my own niece, who is going through an experience that I think will reveal a lot to all of us. Sit back, open your ears, open your heart. I think that you'll find, as I do, that there's something very special going on in the trans community in the United States. Maybe a Girl, thank you so much for being with me today. I'm grateful.
I'm so happy to be here, Marianne. Thanks for having me.
You are the first drag queen ever elected to public office in the United States. You are currently serving your second term on the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council in Los Angeles, where you serve as treasurer and at-large representative. And you are also running for the U.S. House of Representatives in California 28 for the second time, challenging the longtime incumbent Adam Schiff. And in 2020, you lost the primary election by only 1,100 votes, 1,114 votes, or less than 1% of all votes cast in the election. If elected, you will be the first trans person elected to the U.S. Congress. This is Pride Month. We are celebrating LGBTQ existence, really, particularly at a time when it comes to trans people, trans rights, that existence, the full participation of trans people is being challenged by some in our society. And I feel so often maybe that when there's any kind of bigotry or prejudice, that it's usually based on the fact that people don't know Jews, or they don't know Black people, or they don't know trans people. They haven't experienced this. We're all human here. This is just a different variety of humanity that's so fabulous. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. So I'm grateful for the opportunity for people to get to know you. So if we may, can we go back to the beginning? Where were you born? Where were you raised? And we'd love to hear your journey, sexual identity, how old were you? What was your process, et cetera?
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1986. And I spent the first part of my childhood in Pittsburgh. And then we moved to Chicago when I was 9 my mom had a job transfer. You know, I was devastated at the time, but I really grew to love Chicago. That's really where I came of age. That's where I, started to discover who I am. And, I kind of had two coming outs. I had a coming out as a gay man, and then I had a coming out as a trans person. And so I came out fairly early. I came out when I was 16 years old, to my mom at least. And it was kind of an accidental coming out. I wasn't really planning on coming out because in my mind at the time, and again, this is the early 2000s, I thought that my parents were anti-gay, and just from little observations that you pick up when you're in the closet queer person. And so I was afraid to come out, and I came out only because my aunt actually called me up and said, hey, your mom knows that you're gay. And so I was like, well, if she knows, there's no beating around the bush now. So, I wrote her a letter, and we had a conversation, and, there was crying and there was a lot of discussion. And I was so grateful that I ultimately ended up receiving the support from both my parents, my mom and my dad. And, it was an adjustment. It was a process. Again, this was the early 2000s when, I feel like queer people were just starting to be seen in the media. There were things like Will and Grace and Queer as Folk, but that was kind of it in terms of queer representation in the media. So for people who don't know a queer person, it can seem like a very foreign idea. But of course, when you are a queer person, it really guides your journey in every single way. So I was fortunate that I had my parents' support early on. I had the support of my peers, and, I consider myself to be a lucky queer person in that sense, because not every person gets that acceptance from their loved ones and their friends and their community. And then my second coming out was as a trans person. The trans experience and people coming out as trans, I feel like it affects people at different parts of their lives, depending on who they are individually. There are some trans people who know that they are trans, from the moment that they can remember. And then there's other trans people who it kind of takes a little bit of a journey for them to discover who they really are. And, I came out as a trans person, probably, I think it was about 2015. And the reason I came out, or really discovered that I was trans rather, was through my experience doing drag. And that's actually a common story for a lot of trans people, is they experiment with drag and they start to realize that for them, it doesn't feel like a costume. It feels like a greater expression of themselves. Wow. And so, so I've been an out trans person for about 5 years now. And, I'm a little bit older. I'm going to be turning 35 next month. And, So as I mentioned, some people discover this very early on. Some people don't come to this realization until later on, and that's okay either way. There's, everyone's on their own different path and journey. But when I look back at my early childhood and I think about my early inklings with the trans experience, and one of my earliest memories, just in life in general, was I was probably about 3 or 4 years old, and I very distinctly remember asking my mother, when am I going to turn into a girl? And I remember her looking at me and giving me the strangest look and just very flat out saying, that's not going to happen. That doesn't happen. And, as a child, you take what your parents, tell you for face value. And so I kind of just took that idea and buried it. And it's an idea and a conversation that, I've considered many times since my coming out process.
That's fascinating. That is really fascinating. You knew as a child, as a small child. Okay, so it sounds like your parents, certainly your mother, ultimately your father, they came to understand, came to accept, came to embrace. So that was positive. What about when you once you were a drag queen and you realized, as you said, this is a greater expression of my humanity. You weren't just a gay man. You wanted to be a trans woman. You felt that the true expression of who you are is a trans woman. Were you already part of a community where you felt embraced and supported enough in that decision?
I was, fortunately. And, I had just started doing drag. I started doing drag in 2015. And, when you're becoming a drag performer, a lot of it is, you're experimenting with your clothing and your makeup and everything, but oftentimes it's for the purpose of entertainment. It's sort of a fun thing to do. And I started to realize very early on that, I didn't want to take everything off. I felt more myself. I felt more like I was able to express myself as I am as a person, when I'm all done up versus, when I don't have, the hair and the makeup and the wig on. And so I was lucky to have a support group early on. I have a drag family, and everybody's been really supportive in the queer community. And so I was grateful for that.
Okay, so you had moved to Los Angeles before you started doing drag, and you started doing drag in Los Angeles?
I started doing drag in Los Angeles. I moved to LA. It was I moved here full time in 2014. In 2012, I thought I wanted to do a snowbird thing where I spent the summers in Chicago and the winters in Los Angeles. And after spending just one winter out here, I realized, I love Los Angeles. I just want to move here full time. And I started doing drag. And then that was when I started to realize, maybe this isn't just a costume. Maybe this is, who I actually am.
Now, do you feel that the fact you were in Los Angeles, when you made that particular transition, do you feel that being in Los Angeles was helpful because it was a more hospitable environment for that kind of a thing?
Absolutely, yeah. And not to say that Chicago is not a hospitable environment. In fact, they say, they talk about that Midwestern hospitality, and it doesn't necessarily always apply to queer people, but there are a lot of wonderful, fabulous people in the Midwest who are very welcoming of queer people. And then there's people who don't. And, that's really the same anywhere you go. Here in Los Angeles, I think it's much more, I feel like you see it and you feel it everywhere you go, but there's certainly people who in Los Angeles who don't support queer people, who don't support trans people, gay people. And that's something that you'll find anywhere that you go. And it's really unfortunate to have your identity up for discussion.
Right. Your identity, very well put. It's unfortunate to have your identity up for discussion. All right, so were you from the beginning making a living as a drag queen, or were you doing something else as well?
When I first moved to LA, so I have a background in the hospitality and tourism industry. I've worked in hotels as a hotel concierge. I've also worked as an architectural tour guide. And so, when it comes down to it, it's interfacing with people and communicating and, developing relationships. And I'm a people person. I love to get to meet whomever I can meet. And so I was naturally drawn to working in hotels and tourism. And so I started doing drag. I started experimenting with it while I was working at a hotel. And, as things started to pick up as a performer, it takes a while to get noticed. It takes a while to start getting booked in shows. That's sort of started to become my main priority career-wise, was to be an entertainer, to perform in drag. But it's also it's very hard to make money as a drag queen or a drag king. you know, because it's a gig economy. It's unstable. You don't have, you know, you might get 5 gigs next week. You might get 0 in the next 2 weeks following that. It's a little up in the air. But it's been really quite an honor and a joy to be able to entertain, to do what you love. And it's really cool.
And it brings a lot of joy to other people. I mean, it's, you know, entertainment. So let me ask you this. When did the political interests begin? I mean, you're a very serious political candidate. Your political interest, where does that fit into your journey?
Comes from actually when I lived in Chicago. I had actually explored the idea of running for mayor in Chicago in the early 2010s. At the time, Mayor Richard Daley was stepping down, and he was a part of a family dynasty that had lasted in Chicago for decades. And a lot of people were shocked that he was stepping down. And, you know, I thought, why can't a queer person be mayor? And so we explored the idea. We tried to get signatures to get on the ballot. We ultimately did not get enough signatures. So I kind of laid that idea to rest for a while. And then I moved to Chicago, or to Los Angeles. And, you know, sort of the way that I got involved in politics here was actually through drag. And in early 2017, after Trump was inaugurated, I started doing a lot of parody numbers of the Trump administration. So I would do impersonations of Melania Trump, Kellyanne Conway, Betsy DeVos.
Anything you want to do right now?
You know, and I will say it wasn't necessarily, I'm not good at voice impersonations, but I'm good at, you know, doing gestures and mannerisms. So I would put together these numbers that I would lip sync to using audio from actual folks. And, you know, I basically wanted to bring light to all of the atrocious things that the administration was engaging in. But I did it again in a way that is digestible, that is, you know, it's, you know, it's a parody, it's satire, but it's, you know, it's entertaining and a way to sort of bring people in. And one of the reasons I started doing that was because early on, one of the first numbers that I did as Melania Trump, I had somebody come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, I loved your number, but who was that?" And I was really taken aback that, you know, somebody didn't know who the first lady was at that time. And it also made me think, well, you probably don't know all of the awful things this administration is doing. So I started doing it more and more, and I started to become known as the political queen. And, you know, I started thinking about it. I was like, you know, I've always had an interest in politics. I kind of, you know, tried to run earlier on, you know, maybe now's the time. And I saw an ad for the neighborhood council elections on Facebook. And I thought to myself, you know, I could do that. I can do that. And so I decided to run for the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council. And when I did that, I was filling out all of my paperwork. You know, I had to put on my, you know, put my legal name down. And then it says, you know, what's the name that you want to put on the ballot? And I thought to myself, well, you know, most people in Los Angeles here know me as maybe a girl, so I'm going to put that as my name on the ballot. And so, you know, essentially I ran under my stage name. And, you know, I didn't know if I would get any votes. That's, I think, the fear of anybody who runs for office. Will somebody vote for me? Yeah. At the end, you're going to come in last place with 1 vote, and it's from yourself. And so I was so honored and surprised that I ended up winning that election. And it was such a cool experience.
All right, so now let's talk about the serious political space that you're operating within at the moment. You were running for the second time. You're running for Congress now. And the first time you ran, you lost the primary election against Adam Schiff by less than 1% of all votes cast in the primary election. That's huge. Tell me why you're running. Tell me why you think you're a better choice than Adam Schiff. But actually, before that, you would be the first trans person in the US Congress. And the issue of the suppression of trans rights and the violation of trans rights, both legally as well as criminally, is a big issue in the United States today. So I'd like to hear you talk about that, because I think that relates specifically to why it would be a very good thing to have the representation in Congress of someone who actually is a trans person. Tell us about what's happening with trans rights, trans people in the United States, and how that relates to your belief that you should be in Congress.
Absolutely. So, you know, as you mentioned earlier, I was the first drag queen ever elected to public office. And, you know, for somebody that might not understand, you know, drag is what I do, trans is who I am. So, you know, when I put myself up on stage as a drag queen, you know, that's me doing my job. That's me entertaining, being a performer, connecting with people. But my trans identity is something that's constant throughout my life. And, it's so important that we have trans representation, because if there's nobody at the table who is trans, who understands the trans experience, yet we're allowing all of these non-trans people to make decisions for us just in terms of law and how society perceives us, I don't think that that's right. I don't think that that's fair. I don't think it's accurate. And, as you mentioned, trans rights right now are, they're huge in the media, and it's mostly on a state level at this point. In 2017, or I'm sorry, in 2020, there were over 170 anti-trans bills that were moving through state legislatures. In 2020,
I want you to slow down a little bit, because I want everybody to understand what that means. When you talk about anti-trans legislation, tell me specifically what that trans legislation looks like in various states.
Totally. So in 2020, the big topic of the conversation when it came to trans rights was the bathroom bills, and whether people have the right to use the bathroom of the gender that they identify with. And, these were mostly red states that were leading the way. And fortunately, most of those bills did not go through. And, the fact is that, trans people are excluded in pretty much every element of society. There's very few places that trans people can go and feel comfortable unless they're with, their community members, friends, family. But essentially anywhere you go in your experience as a trans person, you're going to face some sort of discrimination, whether that be in a schooling environment, whether that be in a work environment, whether that just be having to go to the bathroom. So many trans children know that they are trans. And it's even, I mentioned earlier, I didn't come out until it was much later, but looking back, I've realized I've always had that queerness within me. And that's something that you recognize and you carry with you. And you know it to be a true fact within yourself. And it's one of those things where it's hard to prove to others, but you know it within you, you know it inside. And
so do you think that the fact that this is such a huge issue today, do you think that there are more people who are trans, who are intersex, et cetera, than there were before, or just that all of this is coming to light now and that so much of this was suppressed before?
I think it's the latter. I think that, trans people have always existed, and they've often existed in the shadows, and they've often been misunderstood by society. I can't tell you how many times, a trans person has been mistaken for simply a drag queen, somebody who's just putting on a costume, a cross-dresser. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it really takes a societal understanding for us to see progression within the trans community. And so I do think that I know that trans people have always existed, non-binary people have always existed, but I think that we're just coming to terms societally with that terminology itself and that language and that amount of acceptance. And I think that for a long time, I guarantee you that there are trans people who are out there who have probably felt those feelings within themselves their entire lives, who have not felt the support of their friends, family, or society to actually come out as trans. And so they live an inauthentic life as the gender that they were assigned at birth. And, that's something that is really sad to me. The idea that you have to hide who you are just to be accepted.
For anyone's identity, for anything. And of course, that's the American ideal, is that you can be whoever you want to be, do whatever you want to do, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. Tell me, why in this, first of all, I've heard you speak. I know you well enough. You were one of the endorsees on the candidate summit. You do not campaign as a quote unquote trans person. You are a very serious candidate who campaigns as a person to represent this district who happens to be trans. Is that correct?
Exactly. And I'm so glad that you said that. Absolutely, queer rights, LGBTQIA rights are, one of my priorities as a candidate, but I think people mistake that as what I'm specifically focused on. And yes, that's absolutely a priority. I want trans acceptance, queer acceptance, and inclusion across the board, but that's not all that I'm running on. I'm running on an entirely progressive platform that, as you know, includes Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, free college, getting corporate money out of politics, and so on. And, even when I was first elected to my position on the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council, I I actually didn't realize that I was the first drag queen ever elected to public office. I discovered that through an article that was written about me, and I thought to myself, oh, well, that's really cool. It's nice to be first at something. But it was also kind of a shock to me because, drag queens are very socially impactful. And, but I started to get annoyed because every interview that I did, every article that came out focused on the drag queen, the drag queen, the drag queen. And again, drag is what I do, but trans is who I am. And so I think due to my identity, I think that media outlets that were reporting on me were sort of overemphasizing the drag factor, the trans factor, and ignoring a lot of my other policies and platform issues.
And that's very clear to anyone who hears you speak about your campaign. A lot of people now moving into the non-trans issue, just the political issue, a lot of people say, Adam Schiff's like a Democratic establishment star. Why would you want to replace Adam Schiff? Give us your pitch.
That's a question that I've time and time again, especially during my first campaign. I would tell them, oh, I'm running for Congress. Oh, that's great. And then I would tell them who I'm running against, and they'd be like, why? And I think that Adam Schiff was, I think that he's been mischaracterized as this progressive hero when
he's not a progressive hero
whatsoever. He's liberal on certain issues. He is, I don't know. I haven't really spoken to him that much, but he seems to be for queer issues. So I think when people think, oh, well, he's for queer rights, he must be a progressive. And so I think a lot of people look at just these social issues and how he handles some of those and think, oh, he must be great. But really, his stardom arose from how he interacted with the Trump administration, his involvement with the Mueller report, and then later down the road as, the manager for the impeachment, and also his involvement with the second impeachment. And so a lot of people were telling me when I was first running, oh, I'm happy with Adam Schiff. We need him right now. We need him. And a lot of the reason that people said that they needed him was because, he was trying to get Trump out. And now that Trump is out and is gone, I
it's
don't.
About moving America forward.
The argument is to keep him anymore. He's been in office for 20 years. I don't think anybody should be a congressperson for 20 years. I mean, that's more than a generation. There's a generational shift that occurs in that moment. And, I personally, if I was to be elected, I would be in favor of term limits. I think we should have an 8-year term limit for Congress people. That's, 4 terms. People see the good side of Schiff, but they don't see a lot of the other things that he's done. They don't see the fact that he's voted for every single war effort since he's been in office in 2001. He, votes every year to, fund the military almost $1 trillion a year. And during his time as a California state senator, he was an architect of mass incarceration in the state of California. He was wanting to put in more and more strict laws that are putting more and more people in prison. And particularly youth. He put forth a lot of legislation in the late 90s that gave youth less of an opportunity, that put more youth in, juvenile detention and things of that nature. And those are a lot of the things that a lot of people don't know about Adam Schiff, because I don't expect the average person to know every single thing about their congressperson. But, in the course of 20 years, of being in office, you have a record. And when you take a look at any politician's record, that is the definition of who they are, is how they're voting, where their votes are going, where their interests are going. And even just as a local politician, I take every single vote that I engage in so seriously, and I'm very proud of my record. And taking a look at his record, I couldn't say the same. I decided to run against Adam Schiff because he's not a progressive. I'm a progressive. He is very middle of the road corporate Democrat. And I've explained to some other people that, it's essentially GOP light. He votes similarly on certain issues as the right does. Oftentimes when it refers to issues regarding the American military industrial complex. So every time there is a vote for a military increase, Adam Schiff is one of the first people to vote yes on that. And it surprises me not at all, because of the fact that you look at his donors, and who are they? They are weapons makers, they are defense contractors. Politicians are loyal to their donors because they know their donors are going to get them reelected. And so we should not be surprised when the politicians that we elect into office align themselves with the corporate interests that funded their campaigns. So that's why Mhm.
What other corporate interests has he taken donations from that we should be concerned about?
So the military industrial complex is at the forefront of that, but also he's taken donations from the pharmaceutical industry, from hospitals, from lawyers and lobbyists. And, you know, again, for somebody who claims to be pro Medicare for all, I just don't see how you can accept money from the pharmaceutical industry and then say, oh, I'm a fighter for Medicare for all. It just doesn't line up ideologically.
I understand. And what is your website?
My website is maybeagirlforcongress.org.
Maybeiagirlforcongress.org. I think you're fantastic. I hope to see you in Congress, but in addition to that, I think that you are such a significant voice. I think you're wonderful. Anything else you want to share?
We are always looking for new volunteers, new people to help our campaign. You know, we have a lot of folks that have been helping us this year, not just here in Los Angeles, but all across the nation. So if anybody listening to this wants to get involved, we would love to have you help us volunteer. You know, if you are an individual, we would love your campaign donations. It takes a lot of money to run for Congress. In our first election, we only raised about $10,000 to Adam Schiff's $10 million. And to lose by just a hair, frustrating, but exciting. And I think if we raise a little bit more money, we get a few more volunteers this year, you know, we can make our way into the general election and make some history.
Okay, everybody, you heard. You can help maybe a girl get into the U.S. Congress. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, MAEBEAGIRL.com. Is that your website?
MAEBEAGIRL for Congress.org.
All my best to you. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, for bringing to light some things that I think a lot of people need to better understand. I think, and I hope, you'll be around for a long time. All my best. Thank you so much.
So appreciated. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too. Lauren Foster, thank you so much for being with me. I'm grateful.
Hi, Marianne.
And I think, just to be very, very clear, we're close girlfriends. So it's not like I'm asking questions of somebody that I don't know, but just because other people listening do not know, Lauren Foster is the director of LGBTQ services at the University of Miami Health System. She's an actress who you might have seen on Real Housewives of Miami and other shows as well. She has also been a Vogue model, and Variety magazine in 2019 gave her a Woman of Empowerment Award. She has been out there. She has been very, very active in trans visibility issues that has really made a difference and impacted our culture. And as you can imagine, for that reason and many others, it's been an honor to know her. For as many years as I have known you, Lauren.
I know. Oh my God, it's been over 2 decades.
Yeah, I remember the first time we met. You know, it's so interesting because you meet people for whatever reason. I remember our first conversation. I remember we were at Harmony Gold in Los Angeles.
On Sunset Boulevard, right?
Mm-hmm. After one of my Course in Miracles lectures, you had your hair back in a ponytail, you had on a white shirt, and you were just this beautiful blonde woman. And you were like an exotic bird to me. It's like, wow. And I've never stopped being amazed. So,
isn't that amazing how we still remember that first night?
Yeah, yeah.
It's so incredible that I still remember.
And then when we met at a store years later in New York.
Right.
Okay, but one thing that I don't know actually, and that I'm eager for everybody to know, is how did your journey begin? I know that you transitioned in. You were born in South. Okay, you were born in South Africa.
I was born in Durban, South Africa.
Okay.
Which is kind of like a surfing capital of on the east coast of Africa. Small British colonial suburb in Africa. You know, very unusual in the 5 decades ago. And from when I was about 3 years old, I realized that I was in a different body. I should be in another body than the one that I was in, the one that I was assigned. And my parents were amazing. I don't want to say they lowered their standards of parenting, but they accepted me as the beautiful self that I was, which is unusual. I mean, they raised a trans child who was loved. They never said that I was wrong. They never said it was bad. They encouraged me to be who I was. And thank God for them, because I'm the person I am today because of that mom and dad.
So let me ask you more about this, because this is so interesting. Because when we interviewed maybe a girl for this same podcast, she too said that when she was 3 or 4, she said to her mother, "When am I going to become a little girl?" So it's interesting, the same age you're talking about. Now, you said your mother was very accepting. What did that look like? Did you dress in girls' clothes? What did that look like?
They let me dress however I wanted, which was mostly in girls' clothes. They let me put nail polish on my nails. They let me invite my trans friends at 9, 10, 11 years old. They let me dress. My mother had a seamstress come over and sew me little garments when I was in dance shows and things like that. Wow. And I always had to cover my nipples because I thought it was inappropriate to have my nipples showing. Things like that. And my mother was so accepting. My father was very accepting, which was amazing back then. I mean, 5 decades ago in Africa.
It is amazing. Now, did you have siblings?
I do. I have a brother who lives in Australia now.
Mm-hmm. So then at what age did you actually transition?
I started living full-time as a girl when I was like 15 and 16. And then I had surgery. I had my gender affirmation surgery when I was 17 and a half, right on my 18th, cusp of my 18th birthday.
Now, were you still living in South Africa at the time?
I was. My parents paid for everything, put me on a plane, sent me to what was known then as Swaziland, because this famous gender affirmation surgeon worked there, Dr. Crichton, and had my surgery. And 9 days later, I came home and I never looked back.
Yeah, really.
My mother helped me heal, told me never to shave my legs. You always want to wax, things. I mean, my mother was incredible. You would have loved my mother.
I can tell that.
Yeah, she was amazing.
So then when did you come to the United States? Or did you go straight from South Africa to the United States?
No, I went from South Africa to London to Düsseldorf. When I became a model, I started modeling in South Africa, and my agency in Durban did not know. I mean, they knew that I was trans. My friend Garth actually said, you should come in. And I did a couple of editorials, and then somebody outed me and said, "Oh, this girl is not a girl. She's trans." And then the magazine did a whole expose on me. So, which was fine.
When you say they did an expose on you, did they do an expose as in this is so fabulous, or did they do an expose as in?
No, they're fabulous. Yeah, yes. I always thought that I've got to get to America. I have to get there. It's going to be the be all and end all of acceptance. I am going to live my perfect life, my authentic life. Everybody will accept me. Well, it was a big shock when I got here, and it still is, because I still think that America is way far behind any other country. I mean, way from South Africa for sure. But it just wasn't that great progression, that I thought it might be.
And you're talking now specifically in terms of acceptance and inclusion.
Acceptance, LGBTQ rights, diversity and inclusion, the whole gamut. And we're still not there.
Quite the opposite. I think with everything that's happened in the last few years, nobody has that illusion about the United States anymore, even Americans. Yet you came here. So you were in London?
I came here. I went from Durban. I then went to Johannesburg, and then I went to Düsseldorf. And I basically jumped around different countries, different agencies, and just did as much work as I could. I went to countries where people didn't look like me. Like I went to Greece, where there were no blonde women in Greece. And so I modeled in Greece. I modeled in Italy. I modeled in South America. I did my first Vogue in Mexico, actually Mexican Vogue. They still to this day don't know that I'm trans. So I never modeled as a trans woman. I modeled as a woman.
Right.
I've never really lived at that address of being trans.
Yeah.
I've lived at the address of being a woman.
That's true of you.
Yeah.
Well, have you felt in the last few years, though, as it's become such an issue, as assaults on trans rights have become such a political issue in the United States, has this called you more to an identification with the trans community than you would ever have before?
I can't not help my trans sisters and brothers. It's just against everything that I stand for. So yes, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to fight for them. I'll find killers of trans women. I'll advocate for them. But but I'm still not living at that address, but I'm going to support them totally. Do you know, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, the issue has become so much more prevalent. I have someone in my family who is transitioning, other people who are family members of family members. Do you feel that you feel called more to be there for young people who are going through, as well as parents and other family members who are going through this in a way that's causing a lot of psychological and emotional challenge for people, as obviously, in addition to the fact that there are political issues? Have you been finding yourself in communication with younger people who need mentoring, who need someone who really understands and can help them through that journey?
Definitely, with younger people and the parents of younger people. They write to me. I get a lot of young kids writing to me through Instagram and social media a lot. You know, gone are those days when somebody writes you a letter or something. It all has, people slide into my DMs, and, you know, a father will say, you know, my daughter is transitioning, or, you know, can you help us? Can you do this? What would you recommend? Things like that. And so that's the most, you know, the most rewarding thing, is to help them and to help the parents as well.
So you keep emphasizing the parents, and I know my family member who is going through this, I've been very impressed by the way she's opening to this, but I know she has questions. What are the kinds of questions that parents are asking you, and what are the kinds of answers that you're giving?
Parents are asking me, one, you know, should they hormone blockers, things like that, and when is it too early to do it, you know? And then I say to them, when you're 3 or 4 years old, you know you're trans. Nobody in their, you know, in their right mind is going to say, I'm trans at 4 years old, if they didn't feel that. We know we are. It's in our hearts, in our soul. So if somebody says, if your child says, I'm trans, or I think I'm a girl, if they're assigned male, or I think I'm a boy, they assigned female, listen to them, because it's true.
So let me ask you a question about that. Do you think that this is a more prevalent phenomenon now, or do you think that, let's say 100 years ago, it was just as prevalent but more suppressed?
I think it was just as prevalent but more suppressed. I think now, because of social media and news and media outlets, we see it a lot more. But it went back to the Egyptian times. You know, we've had trans people.
But there was also much more acceptance of it in a lot of indigenous cultures.
It's Mayan culture. They worship trans women.
Right. So let me ask you this: as you talk about how people know from the time they're 3 or 4 years old, but at the same time, with all the social pressure on teenagers and so forth, and the difficulty that seems even greater than ever of teens really finding who they are, do you think that how do you feel about this business of, you know, some people say, wait until they're 18 years old, the brain itself, there are a lot of things that we feel when we're teenagers, wait till 18. What do you say to them?
You don't have to wait. You can wait till 18 to do surgery and medical things that can't be reversed, but everything, hormone replacement can be reversed. So you can do everything and encourage a child to live their authentic lives, but you don't have to discourage them from being themselves, I don't think. Maybe you shouldn't have surgery at 14, but maybe, you know, wait until they're 18 years old and fully formed. But other than that, I think you should encourage them to be who they are. I mean, I remember the day that I realized that I was trans. It was amazing.
Being at 3 years old.
My father was captain of his cricket team, and you guys don't play cricket here, but so every Sunday we would go to a country club and with my mom and my brother, and my father would play cricket and we would watch the game. And I remember running onto the pitch after my father's game and my father throwing me in the air, you know, childish, silly things, and going back to the men's locker room. And I walked into the men's locker room with my dad, and I saw all these men, and they wear this this card piece over their genitals, and the aroma of the men's sweat and the leather made me completely crazy, and I had to leave. I started crying. I thought there was something wrong with me, and I ran out of the locker room, ran to my mother, and said, "We have to leave. I've got to go home." I started crying. My mother's like, "What is wrong with you?" So I said, "No, we just have to leave. We have to leave immediately." Now,
At 3 years old, you probably were using the word immediately, knowing you. We have to leave immediately. I could actually see you say that.
That was the moment that I realized that I was, that I was trans. That I was.
But wait a minute, wait, I'm confused. I could see you're saying that's the moment I realized I was gay. I realized I had an attraction to men, but why would that make you feel?
No, I didn't have
that you were trans.
I thought I was in the wrong place. I had to get out of there.
Oh, that wasn't where you belong.
I should not be there with all these men.
This is not where I belong.
This is not where I belong.
This is not my tribe.
It's inappropriate for me to be there.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That is so fascinating. Okay, so you said you're proud of being trans. You certainly own being trans, but it's not where you live. It's not your address. And that's my experience of you.
Right.
Has that changed at all over the last few years as trans has become such an issue?
In my dating life, it has changed. Yes. So now I date. I date and I don't hide it. I used to hide it. I'm actually more embarrassed about my age than being trans. Like, aren't you scared somebody's going to find out you're trans? I'm like, no, I'm scared somebody's going to find out.
But hold on. I know a lot of women who feel that way. Just have a Wikipedia page. Everybody knows anyway. May as well just be out with it.
Might as well just Google me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, you have done many things professionally that are very amazing. And one of the things that I have experienced with you is how you're having worked as head of LGBTQ services and concierge services at the University of Miami healthcare system. You have had some really profound experiences, and I think that would be very interesting for people to know about. This, of course, does not have to do with your trans identity, but certainly has to do with your deep humanity. Tell us a little bit about the work that you've done.
This most recent incarnation has really been the most rewarding part of my life. The last 5 years at the University of Miami, with the women that I work with, who and the environment that I work in, they're so supportive and so loving and so accepting of whoever I am. They don't even think of me as being a trans person, but I help the trans community there. I advocate for all the trans and LGBTQ patients that come there. It's just a wonderful place to be. You and I have spoken, you have actually helped some of our patients there. It's just, at this time, AIDS, yes. COVID now is like the new pandemic. It's just, it's not as horrible as AIDS, but it is an awful place to be. And to provide somebody with some kind of compassion and some kind of love, and just to be there for people is just, for me, just an amazing moment. And I'm not trained clinically at all. And this just came to me, like I basically fell into this job, but it's the most beautiful thing.
Several months ago when we talked about this, and you did introduce me to some of the people working at that hospital, you were assigned, you were standing out in the hospital, and when COVID patients, many of whom were dying there at that time, you had to tell family members, no, we cannot let you in. Tell us a little bit about some of your experiences with people and what that trauma was for people at the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, it really is like, it's awful, and it's happening. It's not just at our hospital, it's every hospital in the country. We're loosening up our visitation policy now, but still we have our COVID area, there's no visitation. People sometimes will pass away alone, in a room, on monitors, and it's sad. But for me to be there with the person and with the family member is just, it's a wonderful thing. It's just so great, and it's so appreciated. It's just, I can't, sometimes I just choke up, and I get letters from people and from family members, because I will do like virtual visitation with them. I'll get an iPad, or I'll even use my cell phone, and I'll put them on speaker, and I'll do visitation with them like that. But things are loosening up now, and thank God people are getting vaccinated. And so I feel like that's kind of easing its way out. I mean, the clinic, the health clinic, our hospital, our medical establishment is just wonderful, and they are very supportive of the family members. We try and indulge them as much as we can. There's only so much we can do as far as infectious diseases and things like that is concerned, but You know, it's a beautiful thing. I love it.
You've lived already a very full professional life, and you have found yourself embraced by communities that you've worked in, people who've accepted you. And one of the things that I notice also talking to Maybe is that she too has been accepted. She's found her tribe, found her community, found her broader family. And in both of your cases, not only, as I said before, did both of you talk about a feeling that you were meant to be another sex at 3 or 4 years old, but both of you spoke to parents who were embracing and accepting, particularly mothers. That's no matter who we are or what we do in life, I think that the role of an accepting mother, an embracing mother, an improving mother, you cannot overstate the importance of this. What message would you want to give to parents whose child has expressed, I think I'm meant to be another sex, I think I am another sex, I think I'm in the wrong body? Look into the camera. You can look into the camera right now, because I assure you there are some people dealing with that right now. What do they need to know, and how do you suggest that they can be most supportive?
I mean, gender is not a set of rules. It's not about the way you look. It's not about the way you force other people to encounter you. It's not even about how to make others think about you, right? Gender is, you identify with it. Everybody has a gender identity. It's male, female, both, neither. You can be non-binary, but everybody has a gender identity. If your child says to you, I'm trans, I'm non-binary, I'm bisexual, I'm whatever I am, believe them.
That's huge right there. I'm meant to be a girl or I'm meant to be a boy. I can see a knee-jerk reaction on the part of many parents of, oh, don't be silly. Don't be silly. So what you're saying is take this very, very seriously.
Take it very seriously, because no child would say that if they didn't feel it. And trust me, it takes a lot of courage to say that to your family member, to your parent. You think you might be admonished. You think you might be, struck. There's a lot of things that go on in this country. I don't know. They're just scared to do that. So just when they say that, believe them.
Any other message that you would have for them besides believe them? I think believe them is huge. Anything else? Believe them, love them, encourage them, nurture them, let them be themselves. Let them be their authentic selves. If they want to dress in girls' clothes, let them dress in girls' clothes. If they want to put makeup on, help them put makeup on. My mother used to do it to me all the time. It's amazing. You're a beautiful mother. Hello. Well,
you know about.
Right, it's complicated. Being a parent is hard under any circumstances. It's not all aspects of it are easy. Does it concern you, some of the laws that they're trying to pass in certain states, actually limiting trans rights, whether it has to do with bathroom laws or anything else? Are you concerned as an American?
I'm very concerned about that, especially in Florida. We have this awful governor, I call him Death Santas, governor. No, but I mean, it's wrong. Everything that he does is absolutely wrong. I hate to be party, but the Republican Party they're just cruel to trans people. They're cruel to the LGBTQ people. There's no acceptance. Gender is about expansion. It should be cherished and loved. It shouldn't be like squashed and put down. It's got to be celebrated. And don't pass rules and laws that are going to criminalize us. It's just wrong. I don't think.
And it's certainly very un-American.
It's very un-American. This is the land of the free and the brave.
And you said that your experiences in other countries, particularly European countries, as well as South Africa, your experience was actually that the cultures of the societies were more inclusive, more embracing of these kinds of sexual differences.
I mean, you could get married in South Africa, I think, like 20 years ago.
Wow.
25 years ago. In Australia, Sweden, places like that. We're so far behind, I think, in that aspect anyway.
Well, I think one of the things that obstructs progress here in the United States is that we have all this mythology about ourselves that we are what we're not. And it's difficult to change when you haven't yet faced the fact that you need to.
We are who we are.
Yeah, we are who we are.
Yeah.
And then the whole point of the American ideal is that you're supposed to be able to be who you are, say what you want to say, do what you want to do, expand, spread your wings, whatever those wings are, whatever kind of person you are, as long as it does not hurt anyone else.
Right, right.
But I want to thank you, Lauren, because I think that any kind of prejudice and bigotry and racism, all of that, anti this, anti that, comes from the fact that we don't know people as people. And it's been a great honor to know you. Not only fun to know you, not only my pleasure to know you. We're girlfriends, but more than that, not more than that, but also in addition to that, the fact that you've expanded my understanding. Like I said, you don't live at that address, but you are that address.
I still am that trans.
And you do it beautifully. So thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure always, my darling.
I so appreciate it.
So I will speak soon, yeah?
Absolutely.
All right. Love you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Heather Williamson, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you, of course, are my niece. You are my brother's oldest daughter. And you have been experiencing something that many thousands of American parents are experiencing. I know I speak for many members of our family in saying that we're all very impressed. We've watched you take your journey with such honesty, such vulnerability. And I know that the kind of questions, the kind of issues that you have faced are being asked and faced by many, many people. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to ask you about your journey, because I know it will be helpful to others.
Thank you. Thank you.
How old? You gave birth to a little girl named Aria, and Aria is now transitioning and becoming your son, Alistair.
That is correct.
How old is Alistair?
Alistair is 12 years old now.
And at what age did then Aria begin to say things to you about feeling that she was in a different body, a wrong body? What happened there?
Really, it came completely out of the blue. It was a complete surprise for me. She had turned 10 in May, and about 4 months later, my mother passed away. And at the same time, we also had moved from living with my mother to our own apartment. And so there was a lot of change going on, but I knew something was wrong. Something was wrong with Aria. I felt it in my bones. And I kept saying, what's wrong? What's going on? You need to tell me. Please tell me. Please tell me. And he said, I don't trust you, this and that. And I said, what have I ever done not to not earn your trust? And looking back now, I realized what a huge trust issue it is when you come out to somebody. It's a huge deal for that person, and you have to have ultimate trust and faith in that person. And she thought about it, or he thought about it, and finally came to the conclusion that he did trust me and said, Mom, I'm trans. There was no indication he wasn't a masculine child. He didn't, act like a boy or play like a boy. He just played like a kid. I mean, he wasn't feminine either. He didn't like dolls or dresses or anything like that. And he had always insisted on buying clothes in the boys' department versus the girls. But I didn't see that as a sign. I just thought, well, I was a tomboy too, and girls' clothes are so, ugh, So I just didn't see it as a sign, and I was completely shocked. And I hope that I responded correctly. I think that I did the best that I could in that situation.
What was going on inside you? Were you scared? Were you resistant? Were you nervous? Were you in denial? How did you feel? What did you do? Who did you talk to? What did you read? What was your process?
Well, my first thought was shock. It was the last thing I was expecting Alistair to say was, Mom, I'm trans. I was expecting him to say something like, I'm upset about grandma dying. I'm upset about moving. not I'm trans. And so I just said, okay, well, we're going to deal with this. And kind of went from there, and went home and called my sister and my best friend, both of them. And both of them were like, no, he's not trans. This is, this is a phase or something they saw on TV. And I think, I read on a lot of the groups that I'm in. A lot of parents always say, I think this is a phase that my child is going through, and they just haven't realized it yet. There's a sense of denial in that statement, because it's not a phase, and most likely it's not a phase. And, the younger they come out, usually the more certain they are. So it's not a phase.
When I was 10 years old, I wouldn't have even known the word trans.
It's a different world. And, I knew the word trans when I was little, but I didn't know anybody that was trans. I knew a lot of my parents' friends were gay, and, that was, completely acceptable in our household. And I grew up in a very open and accepting atmosphere, but the trans, it took me by surprise, and I was in a state of shock. I'll admit it.
Where did you go? Are there support groups? Are there places that you would recommend for people, parents?
Absolutely.
And what would they be?
I'm sorry. Absolutely. We, I called, I looked up, psychiatrists for trans youth. And I got a few names, and I talked to a few of those psychiatrists, and they all said, we're not comfortable seeing your son or daughter because we don't typically deal with children that young. We deal with teenagers. And they all kept saying, go to the Montrose Center in Houston, go to the Montrose Center. And the Montrose Center is an organization that, has a variety of resources for LGBTQ people and family and friends that they can access. Everything from therapy to helping you talk to your school, helping talk to your family, and support groups for family and friends, and then support groups for the trans youth as well.
That was going to be my next question. How did you transition in terms of not only Aria? I mean, did you ask her, what do you want your name to be? Did we just go immediately into that? And then how did you inform? I know how you informed our family, which was really great, Heather, how you've handled it. How did that work in terms of school, et cetera?
Well, as I mentioned, 2 weeks before Alistair came out to me, my mother had passed away. So I was going through a lot of emotions at the time, and this kind of added on top of it. And we got through fifth grade kind of, feeling each other out. And he kept feeling me out, trying to push it a little bit more and a little bit more. We got a haircut. We got some new clothes. And then he was ready to start middle school and wanted to start as a boy. And then, we had the pandemic, and we didn't go to school. We didn't start the school year off in school. We started off online. But when it was time to go to school, he wanted his teachers to use the name Alistair and refer to him with he, him pronouns. And it was a struggle getting the school to get on board. It was a struggle. And he had only, about 6 months ago is when he came to me and said he wanted to be referred to as Alistair. So it took a little over a year for us to get to that point. A year of just feeling each other out and feeling, comfortable with the trans definition and meaning and what it meant to us as a family. My first concern was I knew the high suicide rate for trans youth. It's something like 40% of trans youth commit suicide or have tried to commit suicide or have suicidal ideations. And that number was just too high for me to be comfortable with. That was my biggest fear. And I expressed that fear to Alistair. And we've talked about it. And that number goes down when you have the support of your family and your friends and your mother and your father, and then the support of your school, and you extend outward. So you add into that gender affirming care as well. But,
what does that mean, gender affirming care?
So gender affirming care can be anything, can start with therapy. That's where we started. We started with therapy. And we added to that, we found an endocrinologist at Texas Children's Hospital who specializes in trans youth. They have actually a trans clinic at Texas Children's Hospital.
And the school, and so the gender affirming care that you've done physically is aiding the process of his experience of himself as masculine. Correct.
And it's providing that extra layer of support. Like, I feel cared for. I feel taken care of.
Is this affecting his physical appearance as well?
Oh, absolutely. Not the gender affirming care, but the support. When trans men often wear binders to flatten their chest. And when his first binder came in and he put it on, he smiled the smile that I haven't seen in years and years. And he's more open with me. We talk more. It's completely changed our relationship.
And the school is on board now?
Well, I might have, threatened to, that I was, in contact with the ACLU and things like that.
Williamson.
Yeah.
You were going to take that. So that I'm not surprised to hear.
But the GOP has made targeting trans youth their priority this year. And I really feel for trans youth. It's, watching what Alistair goes through on a daily basis, struggling with his identity and with going out in public, and fighting to be seen as a man, as a male, and fighting being bullied and being misgendered and misnamed. It's turned me into an advocate for trans youth.
You're finding your fierce mama bear.
I am.
Now, has school, in-person schooling begun again?
It has.
On summer break, or where are you with that right now?
We're on summer break right now. We finally did. It took getting a letter from the doctor at Texas Children's affirming Alistair's gender as male to get the school to use the he, him pronouns and refer to him as Alistair. So it took a lot.
To choose the name himself?
He did. I think he did a great job.
So do you feel, or does he feel at this point, that his opportunities for relationships, social relationships, people's age, et cetera, is being and or will be aided by this transition? There's a lot of fears. There are a lot of fears. Am I going to be accepted and am I not? Is this person going to like me? Are they not? Are they going to bully me? But I think the friends that he's made this semester all refer to him as he, him, and use his chosen name as Alistair, and that's who they know him as. So they don't know him as Aria. Interesting.
So it's, we're moving forward. Definitely.
Well, Heather, thank you very, very much for sharing your story. And I know that there are so many parents moving through this.
I also am part of a group called Facebook called Parents Supporting Parents of Trans Youth.
Parents supporting parents of trans youth. Okay, so anybody, if you're experiencing this and going through this right now, parents supporting parents of trans youth. Great, Heather. Much love to you. Anything else you want to share, or?
Just as a side note, a little bit of what we talked about earlier. I think that for most parents, what I've learned is that most parents do go through a period of shock and denial and grief. You grieve the expectations you had for your child and the life that you imagined they would have. And you grieve losing their name, because that's, for many of us, we spent 9 months choosing the perfect name for our child, and all of a sudden that's not their name anymore. So all these things are perfectly normal, and you get through it. I would suggest getting support, whether it's through a support group or therapy. But you come out the other side of it, a bigger and better person for your child, and a defender for your child. So.
And in your case, I can attest to the fact that that's true. God bless you, darling. Thank you very, very much for talking to us. All my best.
Thank you.
Well, that was our podcast today. I hope that you enjoyed it. I want to thank my guests, Maybe a Girl and Lauren Foster and Heather Williamson. I know I gained some deeper insight and understanding today into the deeply human experience, not only of being transgender, but also being the parent of a transgender child. And it's so clear that what we need more than anything right now is a deeper understanding of one another, so that we can experience a deeper love of one another. And I want to thank my guests today for helping us to do that. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, and check us out on Spotify and YouTube. Also, I want to say thank you to Lauren Selsky, Wendy Zoller, Helen Caddis, and Mike Burns. I hope you have a fantastic week until we're together again. And once again, thank you for participating with me, for your listening in these conversations that I believe do matter. All my best. Bye-bye.